We all know how to prevent that from happening, right? How to prevent ourselves from being misunderstood. We use nonviolent communication. We're wrapping up the series for February that we've been doing, working with a book called Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Compassion by Marshall Rosenberg. And this is our way here at Unity of Auburn of observing the season for nonviolence, which runs from January 30th to April 4th in honor of two people who gave their lives for the principles of compassion and nonviolence, Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King. This nonviolent communication is a process that we learn and use that teaches us how to communicate in difficult situations where there's a real potential for conflict and separation, and it has 4 parts. In the first part, which we've covered already, we learn how to observe rather than evaluate. For example, telling someone that they work too much. That's an evaluation. But if we were to tell them that they're putting in, we can say, I noticed that you're putting in 80-hour work weeks and you haven't had a vacation in over 2 years. Pure observation, from which I think any reasonable person would conclude that the person is working too much, but skip the evaluation and just put the observation and the facts out there. That's how the process starts. The next step is we identify and express our feelings that are associated with the situation. That's where we left off last week. And what we have to do is learn how to make a distinction between feelings and non-feelings. A feeling is often associated with an emotion, often associated with a physical sensation. That's opposed to how we would interpret the emotion or the sensation, or all of the things that we might think about the sensation, the emotion, or the feeling. We keep the things we think about them and our interpretations out of the picture and just state the sensation and what we're feeling. Getting back to our song from earlier, someone might say that I feel misunderstood. Not a feeling. Not a feeling. But what might be a feeling that arises when we don't seem to be getting our message across to someone? That's the first one I heard, frustration popping up. What else do we hear?
Helpless.
Helpless. That's not bad. Yep, that works. That works well. Yeah. Frustration, you could be irritated depending on the situation, that kind of thing, right? So in the situation involving our workaholic friend working the 80-hour weeks, the feeling we might be experiencing is that we're worried about them. We're worried, that's the pure feeling, we're worried about their health. Or if the person is a significant other, we might be feeling lonely because they're not spending enough time with us. So once we learn how to separate the actual feeling itself from our interpretation or our thoughts about the feelings, then we have to own them. We have to take responsibility for what we're feeling instead of blaming it on someone or something outside us. And remember that not taking responsibility for feelings is one of the major barriers to compassion and empathy in communication. The author has a great example of something that happened at a workshop that he was giving on nonviolent communication. They were talking about denial of responsibility and how important it is to take responsibility for feelings and things that come up. And there was a woman in the audience who insisted that there are some things in life that you just have to do even when you don't want to. And that's a classic denial of responsibility is to say that, well, I had to do it because, and then you fill in the blank with whatever it is. That's a denial of responsibility. But she insisted there are some things that you absolutely have to do even if you don't want to. So Marshall Rosenberg, using nonviolent communication, very kindly asked her for an example. Do you have an example in mind? And she said, yeah, that's easy, cooking. I hate cooking. I hate it with a passion, she told him, but I have to do it. And I have done it every day for 20 years, even when I'm sick. You can hear it. And of course, Marshall responds with more nonviolent communication, and he said that he was sad. There's his feeling. He's owning it. I'm sad to hear that you're spending so much of your time doing something you hated because you felt forced to. Great example of the process in action. And he also said that he had hoped that she would find happier possibilities by learning the language of nonviolent communication. That's the process at work, a denial of responsibility followed by a way to deal with it in a compassionate way. So he found out later that this woman was apparently a very quick study, because she went right home and promptly announced to the family that she was no longer going to cook. She was done with it. And it just so happened that 2 weeks later, her 2 sons show up at one of his workshops, right? And they told him what happened. And of course, again, using nonviolent communication, what do you think Marshall Rosenberg asked them next?
How do you feel about it?
How do you feel about that? Exactly. How do you feel about that? And they said, thank God, now we don't have to listen to her complain at every single meal, right? So it was liberating. It was healing. It sounds like everybody was happy. I think they probably have more work to do, but it's a good start. Of course, it makes me wonder how good the food was in the first place. If you hate cooking that much, how much care and attention are you going to put into the stuff you put on the table? So I'm sure that there was a lot of benefit to go all around on that one. So not taking responsibility, it's really an affirmation of helplessness. It's an affirmation of powerlessness. We're proclaiming to the world that I'm powerless. I had no choice. He makes me angry. You make me feel so sad, and so on. And here's one that I really like. Every now and then you'll hear this. She really knows how to push my buttons, or he pushed my buttons, or whatever. That's something we might hear after somebody loses their temper and lashes out. Really pushed my buttons. I can't think of too many statements that are more disempowering than saying that they pushed my buttons. Do you hear what we're doing there? We're equating ourselves to a machine, like an elevator. Push the button, you go to that floor. Automatically, nothing in between, just a pure mechanism. We're referring to ourselves as a machine, and we're discounting the wonderful power and gift of human consciousness. Now, this is all stuff that we learn, and we reinforce it by our habitual language, but the good news in all that is that if we learn it, we can unlearn it. So, the way we learn to take responsibility for our feelings is by linking them to a need that's not being met. That's step number 3 in nonviolent communication, getting at the need that's at the root of our feelings and then expressing that need. You've observed something that refers to a need that's not being met, and that leads to a feeling. All of that comes together at this point in the process. Most of the time, when we're criticizing or evaluating someone, it's a roundabout way of saying that we have needs that aren't being met. Example, if I call someone inconsiderate, what I'm really saying is that I have a need to know that others are valuing my time, my feelings, my input, that they're giving consideration to my time, my values, my input, things like that, whatever it might be. That's the need that gets linked. When we interpret or diagnose someone's behavior instead of identifying a need that's not being met, we're setting the stage for them to be defensive or to engage in a counterattack instead of an empathetic connection. In the book, in this chapter, he has some exercises that helps us to practice identifying needs. So we're going to work with a few examples here now. So the first one is this statement. You irritate me when you leave company documents on the conference room floor. You irritate me when you leave company documents on the conference room floor. It's a pretty easy one, I think, because it starts out with the classic denial of responsibility. You irritate me, instead of saying that I feel irritated, right? We own it when we say it that way. And the rest of that is okay as an observation. What do you see? I see documents on the floor. Pure observation. But there's no need being expressed. So let's fix it. How about this? I feel irritated when I see company documents on the floor because it's important to me that our documents are safely stored and properly maintained so they'll last longer, so they'll be available for others to use, so on and so forth. Clear communication, feelings are owned, and when we combine it with a need, it all seems to be quite reasonable, doesn't it? How about this one? I feel angry when you say that because I want respect and I hear your words as an insult. I feel angry when you say that because I'm wanting respect and I hear your words as an insult. So what do we have? Let's kind of unpack that here. There's a feeling, angry. There is a need. I need respect. Or you could call it something else, but I need respect. And there is full responsibility there because the person is saying, I hear your words as an insult, which means that they're interpreting the words. This is how it's coming across to me. It acknowledges a degree of subjectivity. And that's okay. You know, even if there was no insult intended, this could open the door to a compassionate exchange. Maybe this person interprets it or hears it as an insult because of some event from the past, something in their history. And if the other person is willing to accommodate that and take it into account, can you see how this might lead to further healing? This might open things up to something that might be very fruitful. You know, the other person is clearly being told, you are not responsible for the feeling. You're not responsible for how I interpreted what was said. So the next exchange might go something like this. The other person might say, when you say you heard it as an insult, I feel confused because I don't understand how you would interpret that as an insult. Would you please tell me more? And all of a sudden we're on our way to this dialogue that again is beginning to build up this process where we're learning more, and it's leading to the possibility of healing and even the possibility of liberation, but it certainly is clear communication at its very basic level. Okay, and I think this is the last example. Yes, the last example here. This should be an easy one. I feel frustrated when you come home late. Perfectly fine for what it is, right? There's a feeling, there's an observation, but this is an exercise in identifying needs, and there is no need being expressed here. You're late, I'm frustrated, so what?
Call me.
What's that?
Call me.
Call me, yeah.
Call me.
Let's fix it. Yeah, let's fix it. How about this one? I feel frustrated when you come home late because I was looking forward to arriving at the theater in time to get our favorite seats. Or good seats, whatever you want to call it. Simple, clear, straightforward. There's no guilt, there's no accusation, there's no characterization of the person's conduct, no criticism. Again, we have responsibility for the feeling, a clear statement of what is needed. I suppose we could quibble about whether this is a want or a preference rather than a real need, but you know, it's certainly not frivolous or superficial because it's okay to ask for something that would enhance our experience. I mean, doesn't everyone have a favorite place to sit at the movie theater? Doesn't everyone have a favorite place to sit? How many people, let's take an informal poll, how many people like to sit in the very back row? Do we have any back row sitters here? We do. I see some hands up. Now, let's go to the opposite extreme. Is there anyone who really enjoys that first row experience? Anyone enjoy the first row experience? I do. I'm looking. I don't see a single hand. That's interesting because I'm with you on that. That first row where you're sitting back having to look up at the screen and it's overwhelming you and you go home with a stiff neck, that's not fun. But beyond that, there's all sorts of places. Some people need to have an aisle seat or would prefer to have an aisle seat. I like to be right kind of smack dab in the middle. I like to pick that one seat where I can sit down and the screen fills my field of vision perfectly and I don't have to turn my head back and forth to follow the action. You know what I'm saying? So It's okay to have that kind of a preference. You can call it a need because it enhances your experience of life. It's something that might make life more wonderful. Okay, that brings us to the last step in the process, which is making a request. Preferably a positive and specific request. This is how they describe it on the website, and there is a website for nonviolent communication called the Center for Nonviolent Communication. You've got the address in your handout in the bulletin if you want to check that out. They say that this fourth component addresses what we are wanting from the other person that would enrich our lives or make life more wonderful for me. Okay to ask for that. It's okay if it's asked for as a request, but not a demand. Another technique that they recommend is using positive language. Say what it is we want the other person to do instead of telling them what not to do. He quotes a great line from a children's song that I'd never heard of before, but the line goes like this: "All I know is I feel won't when I'm told to do a don't." It's kind of fun, isn't it? All I know is I feel won't when I'm told to do a don't. And making a request for someone to not do something can backfire. Here's an example, another one of his workshops. He was talking to a woman who expressed worry and frustration because her husband was spending too much time at work. So she requested that he not spend so much time at work. One day he came home and proudly announced that he was signing up for a golf league after work. Oops, you know that wasn't what she had in mind. Seems obvious, but it ain't. What might have worked better was for her to say that she would like him to spend at least one evening during the week at home with her and the children. That's both positive and very specific, right? One evening or more on a weekday at home, not tinkering in the garage, mind you, or down in the basement, but actually with the family. Can't get more clear, specific, and positive than that. And being specific is important because vague language contributes to internal confusion. Confusion, frustration, and Marshall Rosenberg has an interesting theory. He says that lack of specificity about our needs can also be a component in bringing about depression. I thought that was interesting. If we grow up getting the message that it's somehow more spiritual to deny or suppress our needs, we're setting ourselves up for trouble because those needs are not going to go away. We can deny them, we can minimize them, try to suppress them. They are still there, and eventually we're going to end up with both the frustration of unmet needs and that all-expense-paid guilt trip for even having those needs in the first place, which we now have to confront. So I think that's an interesting theory. It's about the need to be specific and positive when we make that kind of a request. When we're coming to dealing with our needs, we can't be afraid of them. We want to convince ourselves and make sure that we're giving ourselves the affirmative message that it's okay to have them, provided that they don't diminish another person's experience. It's all okay. And that's about all we're going to have time for today. The process is simple. 4 steps: observation, feeling, need, and request. And we can spend the rest of our lives learning how to apply it skillfully and effectively. And it can be difficult because remembering these steps when we're in the middle of a situation is a challenge, especially when you're new to it. In fact, that was one of my initial points of resistance when I first learned about this process back in 2003, back when Karen and I were at Unity Institute. What I found helpful to me was to do it in reverse. Learn it by applying the steps after the fact, right? 20/20 hindsight. If you forget to apply it during the situation, you can always replay that situation like rewinding a movie and see where we might have done better in terms of making an observation instead of an evaluation, identifying a feeling instead of our thoughts about the feeling, making a request instead of a demand, and expressing that all-important need. And again, as I said earlier, If this is really interesting to you, there are workshops and coaching programs that you can check out at the website and jump into it further. So next week is the first Sunday in March. March is here already, and Lent starts the following Wednesday on the 6th. So we're already into the Lent leading to Easter season. For those of you who have a traditional Christian background, the approach of Lent might carry some important or interesting memories. Maybe even, shall I say, some baggage, if you know what I mean, because I always thought of Lent as kind of this 40-day guilt trip. But when I started learning about unity, I discovered something different about the whole thing, and we'll start talking more about that next week. See you then. Thank you.